Welcome back to Gator Talk. I'm Zach Zavala reporting for the Golden Gate Express, and today I have the honor of interviewing Marc Grossman. Our goal for today's conversation dives into the historical impact of Cesar Chavez's work through the eyes of individuals like Marc, who shared his journey to educate and inspire future generations about his contribution to social justice and labor rights. Marc, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Zach.
Can you please share how you first became involved with the Cesar Chavez movement?
Well, if you were on or near campus in the late 60s, you were boycotting grapes or something else. And I spent a lot of time on picket lines after class. And Fridays, we'd go in car caravans taking donated food and clothing to the strikers in Delano. So I met Cesar that way, but I really got to know him through his eldest son, Fernando. Nickname is Polly around family. Been my best friend since we were 19, 20-year-olds. So once I got involved, I never stopped. It's my 55th year.
Wow. And you're still involved with the foundation today?
Yes.
And what are some of the most vivid memories and experiences working with alongside Cesar Chavez, and some of the struggles that you went through and how you overcame them?
Well, I helped Cesar with his speeches and press work, but by far the most challenging duties came as his personal aide. He'd take me with him almost everywhere in California, often out of state. Those were very intense times. 1975, Cesar had his longest, least known march, 1,000 miles in 59 days, to take news to farm workers of their newly won rights under the state farm labor law that had just passed. We'd march 20 miles a day, and this is the era before cell phones. He still had to run the union. I learned the location of every payphone in rural California. I'd call in, get his messages, find out the decisions. I couldn't wait for him to be on the phone late at night, go to the march, brief him. He'd instruct me. I'd find the next payphone. And then after marching 20 miles a day, we'd have a 3-hour rally with farm workers, hundreds of them organizing their companies, get home to the house he was staying at, usually farm workers' home in rural areas. And he'd have the only meal of the day, and then I'd help him organize the calls he had to return. And late at night, before he was going to bed, he was 48, no spring chicken. And he was worried about physically maintaining. I had a big tub, filled it with water as hot as he could stand, and Epsom salts. He'd sit on the bed in his room and put his feet in the water and lay on his back. He'd be out in 4 or 5 minutes, and I'd wait and put him in bed, cover him up, and that went on for 59 days. The guys on his security detail and we were 20, 25 years younger than he was, and we had trouble keeping up. You had to keep up with his schedule, his pace, the demands he put on himself. And this was all under the shadow of federal agents notifying the union of assassination plots.
Wow. And when you heard about those assassination plots, what was the first thing that went through your head? And what was the first thing that went through Cesar's head?
Once agents even gave us photographs of the hitman who had been hired.
Wow.
CHP arrested the guy outside Salinas, about 10 miles from where Cesar had been the day before. He was stalking him. Cesar told his wife he was on the road for about 2-3 weeks, never sleeping in the same place twice. And finally he told Helen, his wife, he said, "I'm going to go home. I want to go back to work. And I'm not a coward. I didn't do anything wrong. And if they want to kill me, then that's God's will." But he wouldn't be intimidated.
That's super brave. And can you share a story that most people wouldn't know about Mr. Chavez?
Cesar would often have trouble holding on to secretaries or office workers. If they're good, you normally want to hold on to them, but not Cesar. Especially if they came from a farm worker, working class family, if they had talent, Cesar would get them to be something more, push them really hard to become an administrator, a negotiator, an accountant. There were literally hundreds of young women and men that he helped them fulfill dreams some of them didn't even know they had at the time. And thousands of people like me trace our social political activism to the training and experience we had working with Cesar and the movement. And really, in the end, wasn't that what he wanted for farm workers too? The capacity to be able to sit across a bargaining table with their employers as equals and not just to have to take orders all their lives. You know, he looked and talked and acted and behaved pretty much like the people he was trying to help. And farm workers and Latinos especially would look at him and they'd say to themselves and others, he looks like my father, my uncle, my brother, my husband. If Cesar Chavez can do these great things, maybe I can too. I think sometimes we hold our heroes too high up and too far away.
Yeah. Can you share any stories or anecdotes that illustrate how working with Chavez influenced or shaped your own beliefs and values?
A journalist with one of the national magazines came out to California mid-70s to do a profile on him and followed him around to farm worker rallies, meetings, marches. Wherever he was with workers, they would have him sign leaflets and hats and flags, all manner of things. And fathers would take photographs of Cesar with their young children using these little Instamatic cameras. The reporter in an interview later asked Cesar what accounts for all the affection and respect farm workers show you in public. And Cesar paused and smiled, and he just said, "The feeling is mutual." You know, I earned 2 degrees from the University of California after getting involved with the movement. But the most important lessons in my life I learned working with Cesar and the farm workers, lessons about self-sacrifice and commitment, about what it means to be a man, about what it means to be part of something bigger than you are.
Yeah. And with that, like looking back, how do you think Chavez's legacy continues to impact social justice in today's world? We have fake news. We have, many news sources from whether they be social media or, news outlets that people don't really agree with or align with. I wonder what that take on, what that would, mean to you, or what do you think Mr. Chavez would think about that in today's world and how that would affect, the movement?
People don't know today, or they forget, that Caesar probably had more defeats than victories. And after each defeat, he would pick himself up off the ground, dust himself off, and rejoin the fight. He'd say, in La Causa, our cause, it's not like a baseball game. You go 9 innings, whoever has the most runs wins, the other team loses, or a political race, run a campaign, whoever gets the most votes wins and the others lose. He'd say, in our struggle, you only lose when you stop fighting, when you give up. So the lesson was, if you persist, if you resist, and if you don't stop fighting, you're going to win in the end. He used to say that the rich have money and the poor have time.
That's super true because, not everyone has their, set journey, and everyone's journey is different. You know what I mean? So whether or not you have the ample resources to have that extra time, it really makes a big difference on where your life is going to take you.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you offer to younger generations who are inspired by Chavez's movement and want to make a difference in their own communities? To dig a little deeper, San Francisco State, we have a building dedicated to Cesar Chavez, our student center, and I'm very proud to be a student here as well. Our students are known for, you know, fighting for what they believe for. You know what I mean? And they have rallies and are not afraid to really speak up, especially in this day and age, for what is right at the end of the day.
Well, if Caesar were around, he would be aghast at all the public places, things that are named for him. He rarely let anybody do that when he was alive. And he would say, don't you have something more important to do with your time than this? But someone once told me that the greatest thing that you can achieve in your life is to be a man or a woman of your times. And when my comrades and I were young in the movement, we lived in tumultuous times, and we helped each other do some great things. We didn't everywhere succeed, but at least we can take some comfort in knowing that we didn't sit on the sidelines. We joined the cause and we engaged in the fight, and we got to know what it means to be part of something bigger than you are. And I think that's a yearning that is every bit as timely and as relevant today as it was in Caesar's time. You know, everyone needs to find something that they're willing to fight for, something that's more important than they are.
This isn't your first time to San Francisco
No.
State, is it? Can you tell me a little more of that?
1976, UFW had a big statewide political campaign. Cesar was invited here, I believe, by the local Mecha Chicano student group, and he spoke here, but it wasn't his first time here. In 1965, second month, the Delano grape strike, Cesar went to Cal Berkeley and Sproul Plaza, spoke there, and then they drove him across the bay, and he came to San Francisco State. It was unlike, I think Cal Berkeley then was a little more intense than SF State, but he spoke in a classroom, a lecture hall, about 400 students. No one knew who he was then, but that was his first visit on campus.
Well, his legacy has definitely left a big impact on us, and I'm sure just future generations as well.
Cesar had a, you know, today his name is invoked often to promote higher education, especially. And, you know, this was a guy with a 8th grade education, but he was incredibly well read. If you ever are going down Southern California, in Kern County, where he spent his last quarter century, is now, we call it the National Chavez Center, 187 acres up in the Tehachapi Mountains, town of Keene, and about little more than 2 acres is now the Cesar Chavez National Monument, which is the 398th unit of the National Park Service. Cesar Chavez Foundation administers in a partnership with the Park Service. But in there is his carefully preserved office library. There must be 4,000 volumes. And he, you know, he taught himself accounting by reading a book, and his reading interests were eclectic. I mean, from literature, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, to financial management, to history and photography and the arts. But when he would find, you know, he would meet a young college student that he thought had promise, and sometimes he would say, "Oh, well, why don't you quit your college and come go to work for my college?" He'd try to recruit him. But it wasn't that he didn't respect education. And there were certain subjects that he, especially when he knew I had a master's degree in journalism, that was something you could use, you know. But just going to college for the purpose of going to college and getting a degree didn't quite appeal to him. And he thought education needed to have a greater meaning than just, you know, personal advancement for one individual. That, you know, you couldn't just, you know, go away to college and forget where you came from. And then he'd say, you know, education must have meaning for your community too. You need to be able to use it. You know, you can't just forget about, you know, the people you left behind. You know, he said, the end of all education must be service to others.
I mean, he has these almost these sayings that you find in a fortune cookie.
Well, go look up his speech, 1984, to the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco here. And it was the first time that he ever spoke from a text. You know, not that we didn't work hard on his speeches, but he would use outlines, you know, Roman numeral 1, capital A, Arabic numeral 1, that way. And so he would prepare, but he thought that reading from a text was phony. It's what the politicians do. And then finally, I convinced him in this case that some speeches are so important, every word counts. And he agreed. And so, it was, he got in there by, who was the president of the Commonwealth Club that year was Shirley Temple Black, the child actress. Yeah. And when the invitation came, he was a little, wary because she was a Nixon. So he asked me to check it out, called the club, and Mrs. Black called back right away. And turned out she was a big fan. When she was a child actress, she had, didn't make any more films after her childhood. But she kept up her membership in the Screen Actors Guild, wanted to support other actors. And then years later, she needed radical cancer surgery, and it was all paid for because of her union health plan. So she was really a pretty good trade unionist, and very much wanted Cesar to go. And we worked really hard on that speech. And it's one of the few times when he was very introspective, placed himself and his union in an historical context, and you take a look at it. They had lunch on the dais before he spoke, and they got along like old friends. They had interest in vegetarianism and gardening. It's like they'd known each other forever.
Was Cesar a vegetarian?
Oh, a strict vegetarian. Yeah. I think he took as much personal satisfaction in converting people to vegetarianism as trade unionism. It worked on me for years to no effect.
Yeah.
But
are you vegetarian?
Oh no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But he got me to give up pork for a year. He said, you have this wonderful 5,800-year tradition, Judaism, and you eat pork. So he guilt tripped me into doing that for a while. But, in my family, you not only had to marry someone who was Jewish, they had to be Russian. And I married 2 Mexican Catholics. And before that, I fell in love with a third. So we had 3 Mexi-Jew sons. And now we have 2 beautiful little granddaughters, 5 and 8. And the 8-year-old, she likes to boast, I'm a Latina. She's a quarter, but it's all right. It's America.
Yes.
Real
quick before I let you go, how did Cesar deal with the fame and the recognition of what he was doing?
He took me aside once, like 45, 50 years ago, actually. And he said, here's 3 lessons to live by. He said, never take yourself too seriously, never get in a pissing contest with a skunk, and never let a son of a bitch know that he's a son of a bitch. Pretty prescient when you think about it.
Another fortune cookie.
Uh-huh.
Marc, thank you again so much for being here and for sharing your firsthand accounts with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for watching Gator Talk. We'll be back with more episodes.